Hello everybody and welcome to Setting Up API Programs for Success. In this talk, I want to talk a little bit about how to set up API programs so that they are successful, that they accomplish the goals that you set out to accomplish. And I specifically want to make sure that you cover all the areas that are important to cover so that your API program actually can be successful. This webinar is the second one in a series of webinars. The first one is about API guidelines. So it's more about how to help individual teams and looks at how to make individual teams more effective. This one here is about API programs, so how to design the environment in which teams are working. So it's a little bit higher level. And the third one is about API strategy. So it's even higher level and talks about what are the goals that you are even trying to accomplish so that you can make sure that before you start an API program to help API teams, that you first spend some time thinking about what do I even want to accomplish. So today's goal really is to talk about API programs, which often are the things that are either planned or executed in companies to make sure that APIs become more of the norm, that APIs get developed and used more in organizations. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Erik Wilde. I am an API practitioner, an API thought leader. I spend a lot of time in the API space. I used to talk at conferences a lot. Now I'm making a lot of videos, and it's something that really has driven me for a very long time. Personally, my background is in computer science, and I've been doing this for a couple of years now, where I really focus on APIs and trying to help organizations make the most out of APIs. I'm part of a team that is called the Catalysts. We're a team within Axway. So Axway is a software company that has a couple of products in the API space. And the role of our team is to help customers use APIs in a better way. So our goal really is not so much to help with specific products or product usage, but to make sure that organizations really use APIs in the most effective ways so that when they start investing in products, start investing in their API journey, that they are really successful with that and that we can make sure that they get the most out of their investments. We're a small team of 7 people. We're distributed across the globe. We have a couple of people in Europe, some in North America, and we have also somebody in Asia. So what I want to talk about today is really this idea of how do you start becoming more API focused, more API oriented, so that the value chains that you're building are more and more focusing on really being digital, on being composed out of digital products, and that you become better at creating those value chains, analyzing those value chains, tweaking those value chains, testing them, maybe rolling them out quickly and then discarding them when they don't work. So generally speaking, it's this whole idea of digital transformation and how to become faster in that space. And it's really something where it's important to understand that while APIs in itself are not such an important, such a complicated thing, it's the scale that often creates problems within organizations. Right? So creating individual APIs is not that hard, but making sure that the organization does this at scale, that everybody knows why they're doing this, how to do it, how to move over to a model where in the organization APIs are just the way how things are being built, that's really the hard part. Right? So scale really is the problem. And when you look at how in organization that often happens, it's this move where you say, we started with APIs, so we created some initial APIs, maybe because we thought, okay, we want to have this capability being available in some shape or form. Let's create an API and see how this works. Maybe that worked well, so you want to go down that path and do that more often. And then you move kind of from an API on demand view where you just create an API when you had to really thinking of API first, thinking about anything that you do within the organization should have a representation as an API so that it's available in a digital form. And that is really important as a journey in the organization, that people start understanding and practicing this mindset of APIs as the standard way how capabilities are being implemented, represented, combined, and utilized within the organization. And like I said in the introduction, having a program is in this middle space between helping individual teams creating APIs, often with API guidelines and tooling. Then you have a program which creates that framework within the organization, and then you often also have a platform which is the support structure that teams can build on. So it's a runtime environment, it's development tools, it's also practices, guidelines, right? All these things where teams are enabled to do their API work in a more effective way. So really what we're looking at is API programs as this way of pushing APIs deep into how an organization works. Like, this is just how we build stuff. And it's really this shift in mindset that often creates the biggest problems. When you look at this study, which I've linked from the slides, you can just click on it and you'll get to the actual study from this slide. It's a study by McKinsey, and it's just one example. There's others out there, and they all basically say the same, which is that the biggest problems organizations face with digital transformation and their API journeys is not so much getting started, but scaling it up. Because getting started really often just means you have one initial team or project where this is being practiced, and often it's a willing set of people, so they are really interested in doing that. So that often really works relatively well. Where the problems often then happen is to scale this up to the organizational level, where you start saying, and now we want everybody to be a part of this, and we want everybody to practice things like this. And this is often where the problems are happening. And an API program can really help with making sure that these problems do not happen, but it needs to have the right scope. If you don't have the right scope, if you see it as a merely technical exercise, it's relatively likely that you'll be one of those companies shown here that will experience some problems, some stalling along the way on their digital transformation journey. And what API programs really do is this idea that they create this environment, this structure where teams that are developing products can do that. So the program creates a platform, and this platform then serves as the foundation for the individual products that are being built. And the program's main job really is to make sure that everybody is invested in that platform, understands the value of the platform, understands what the platform can do for them. And they also contribute to maybe saying that we wanted something like this, it's not part of the platform so far, we should really change that so that teams can become more effective. The next team doesn't have to solve the same problem again, but it becomes part of that platform. So it's really this idea of creating a platform and making sure that everybody is part of that journey of using the platform and creating APIs in the organization. And in order to make sure that everybody really is on board, it's really important to make sure that you cover various areas with your program. And that is not just a technical thing where you would say, well, we need to have certain tools and then everything will be great. It's bigger than that. And the areas that you have to cover, they are listed here. And I will walk you through them one by one and give you an example for what is part of that area so that you understand why it's important and what's part of that area. And in my mind, really the most important thing for API programs is to make sure that when you have an API program where you think about, are we doing the right things? Do we cover everything that we should be covering? Don't initially just look at technical details. Do you have a tool for task X? But really expand your scope a little and look at these areas and think about, do we cover all these areas, or do we just leave out some of these things? And then even though technically maybe we cover a lot of stuff, there are things that we don't cover that actually create risks for our API program. Okay, let's go through these areas and see what they are. So the first one is strategic alignment. The strategic alignment really means that the idea of an API program is to turn an API strategy and turn it into reality. Right? An API strategy should tell you what you're trying to accomplish with APIs. And the API program then is what actually takes your strategy and tries to execute it. And that's really hard sometimes for organizations to make explicit. So whenever I go to organizations and we're starting to talk about APIs and maybe some of the problems they have, like one question that I ask at the very beginning always is, what's your API strategy? Right? What are you trying to accomplish with APIs? What are your goals? What are your non-goals? And it is pretty amazing how many organizations don't have that. They don't have a list of goals. They don't have a strategy that tells them this is why we're even investing in all of this. And it's really important to have that, because it's very hard to work towards goals and to accomplish goals when you don't have them, when they are like a little nebulous and it's not quite clear what exactly it is that you're trying to do, how you can measure success, how you can try to make sure that you get to success a little bit faster and so forth. So it's really something where it's important to think about, why do we even do this? And this why do we even do this must be something that is driven in the end by business. It cannot just be we're doing APIs because that seems to be a thing nowadays. It really has to somehow in the end talk about business goals, and then you can make sure when you do this and it's tied to business goals, that when you try to figure out what have we accomplished, you can also say, oh, we have accomplished this, and we also, by this, we have also accomplished these business goals. And for example, one thing that is really important in that space is to think about, why do we even build APIs? Who's the audience? So ideally, APIs should be used both internally and externally. Right? So internally is when you use APIs to compose value chains and to be able to build them quicker and so forth. That's important. Externally often means you have APIs to interface with external partners. So you use their APIs because they do something that you don't want to do, or they use your APIs because they are your business partners, and API-based value chains are the way how you engage in business. So in both cases, you use APIs, but the goals are relatively different. In one case, it's you kind of re-envisioning your organization as an API-based value chain, or a set of API-based value chains. And in the other case, it's more you and other organizations engaging in these API-based value chains. So in one case, it's intra-organization, and in the other case, it's inter-organization. And again, both are valuable. But it's important that you think about what you're trying to do. I would highly recommend that you think about both things, internal and external. It's really important, I think, to do that. And we'll talk about more about this in the other webinar about API strategies. But regardless of what you decide to do, be explicit about what you're trying to do, so that you can then check your program and see, do we do everything that we need to do to accomplish this goal? To either improve internal usage of API or to improve external usage of API. So that's an important thing. That was the first area, the strategic alignment. The second one is organization and culture. So what does that mean? Organization and culture really means that APIs are a technical thing, but in the end, the value of APIs is not so much on the technical foundation. The value is to decouple things better within your value chains so that you can then combine things more easily, recombine them, tweak them, build new value chains more quickly, and so forth. So in the end, the APIs are valuable mostly because they allow your business to become more modular, faster to change. And that's something that is not a technical thing. It's really something where you have to make sure that people understand that the goal of the whole exercise is to improve the speed with which the organization can build things and change things. And everybody needs to be a part of this. If you just take what you have and re-implement it with APIs, there's no value in the APIs themselves unless you also have some process in place that now means that you can change things quicker and you actually do it. And everybody is on board with doing that. And that's where the value lies. So you have to make sure that this whole idea of APIs being the building blocks for digital value chains is something that becomes part of how the organization is really doing business and how the culture in the organization is really absorbing that and says, yes, we should change quicker, we should experiment more. These are all things that will make us more fit, that will improve us as an organization, so we should really do that. And it's really important to make sure that you are taking this view at APIs, this view of APIs as the enabling factor and not just it's an interface and that's all that's important. And as an example for this idea of organization and culture, for example, this is an example taken from the Continuous API Management book, which talks about how decisions are being made. So in many organizations, decision making is complex and it slows things down. Right? We all know these organizations where there are these long chains of command where if something has to be done, multiple checks have to be done. Some of them make sense, others don't really seem to make that much sense, but for some reason there's still this process in place. So decision making is something that has to be done all the time, and it can be very time consuming. It can slow organizations down a lot. If you have API-based approaches, ideally teams can become more decoupled, but that's only true also if they have more authority, if they can not just technically decouple things, but they also have the authority to just move on and do stuff without having to check with everybody else whether it's okay to do things or not. And the way how you can then tweak this in your organization is, for example, changing the way how decisions are being done. So decision making is this process of inception, choice generation, selection, authorization, implementation, and challenge. And how can you make these changes to decision-making processes? For example, in this idea of an API program, you could say, how are teams able to choose a programming language? And one way you could do that is you could, for example, say, well, if you want to choose a programming language, we have a set of fixed programming language choices that are actually generated in a centralized way, because we think that we shouldn't just use languages as they appear. So that's a centralized choice to make. And we also say, okay, that here are the choices that you can choose from. The selection then, for example, could be decentralized, where each team is free to make a choice from that list of programming languages that are the ones that are supported at that point in time in the organization. And authorization also could be, if you make a choice from that list, that's fine. You can just go ahead and implement your project using that language. And if you use this process, for example, that means that this idea of implementing a project in a certain, or a product in a certain language, becomes relatively quick. The team needs to make sure that they pick the language that they think would be the best choice, and then they can just move forward with it. A second example for decision-making process could be, how do you choose software development tooling? And that could be a different decision process, right? So you could say, Using software development tooling is much more decentralized. In the end, there needs to be an authorization where somebody, probably also because there's some budget involved, you need to buy maybe that tooling if it's a commercial product. So there may be some centralized parts to it, but again, it could be something where you design the decision process in a certain way in order to make sure that teams can move fast. Again, what we're looking at here is this idea of what do we have to put in place so that APIs are used as a way to decouple teams, to improve speed in an organization. And on the organizational and cultural level, this is an example of how you can do that. Changing the decision process so that authorization is not required maybe quite as often, and you have more autonomy for the teams to move forward. Next area that is important, awareness and adoption. So when you look at awareness and adoption, in many cases, actually, when you look at organizations starting their API journey, I have had some feedback where teams are saying, yeah, we know APIs are nice and we would like to provide an API for what we're building here, but we just don't have the time for it. And for them, like APIs then are more like a luxury almost. They understand that it's a good idea to do, but if it's not valued highly in the organization, and if APIs are more this side effect of what happens while you are building things, then it becomes a problem because teams don't really treat APIs with the priority they should be treating them with. And in order to change that, everybody has to understand that APIs are central, are really important, that if you do not have basically an API for your product, so to speak, doesn't even exist. It's not visible in the digital space. It doesn't have a digital representation that you can work with. So having an API, if you look at it this way, is absolutely critical. Otherwise, you're building something that you can't easily integrate into value chains, and that becomes a problem in an organization that is really moving towards this idea of fully digitalized value chains. So in the end, it's really important that this value of APIs is something that everybody understands. And everybody really meaning everybody, not just the development folks, but also the business folks, understanding that if I ask somebody to develop something, we will have a conversation about APIs. How is that capability that we're going to develop, how is that going to be represented digitally? Where will I be able to use it? How can I design it so that I can use it in as many value chains as possible, so that when designing it, I already try to make it flexible, reusable to some extent at least. That is a thought that everybody should have as a very natural impulse. So when you look at this, then one example of awareness and adoption, for example, is that it's really important that when people start moving towards consuming APIs, they also understand that when you decouple things like this, you have to practice things a little bit differently. So for example, when you develop software in an API-oriented world, you always have to develop it assuming that an API that I consume might not work. What do I do then? Does my product just fail? Does it just stall? Does it just block? It should behave as good as possible. And I'm always surprised sometimes when you look at organizations working with APIs and developers using APIs, and then when you look at the development practices, actually some of the practices don't really take into account that any API basically may fail at any time. And they always have an idea of how that behavior reflects itself in the code, so that you have fallback behavior, you have meaningful warnings, you have all the kinds of things that you should have, that your value chains are robust, and that any component that is failing or misbehaving is handled as robustly as possible. So again, this also is an important part, that you understand that if you decouple things and this is how you design your value chains, everybody has to make sure that they behave accordingly, or you might run into some problems. Now, the next area to look at is observation. What is observation? Observation means really that an API program is mostly a supporting thing. It supports teams to build API products. It does that by creating an API platform and surrounding structure, but it also should make sure that it always listens to the products, that you observe what people are using, that you observe what people are not using, so that you understand what is the practice in the organization. So an API program should not aim to be all top down, just trying to tell people everybody has to do it like this. It should be more bottom up, looking at how are teams approaching the problems that they work with or that they are tasked with. And then it should try to enable them as much as possible. So the main goal of an API program really should be to be the supporting infrastructure for individual teams. And in order to do that, you really need to observe what's happening. You need to understand trends. You need to see, oh, everybody seems to be doing this. People are doing that. People are not doing this anymore. So maybe we should change our recommendations, our guidelines a little bit and tell people, it seems like most people are doing it now this way. So that seems to be the preferred way of doing things right now. So it's really something where observation is important, that you just capture the practice in your organization. And if you're not doing this, you really run the risk of losing touch with what developers are doing, and then they might not feel heard, they might not feel supported enough, and then the effectiveness of your program will suffer. One example for observation is exceptions. So if you have what we discussed a little bit before, the decision-making process, and every decision-making process should have this exception mechanism in it where decision is made a certain way, but at some point maybe somebody's asking for an exception for certain reasons, and maybe there's a way how they can be granted that exception. And observing those exceptions is good, because if more and more teams are raising these exceptions and are saying, yeah, it's fine that we can have these things, but we really need that other thing, then you understand what are the new things that teams are using, that teams are needing, and that will help you to understand how maybe you have to adapt your API platform in your API program so that it becomes more useful, so that teams are not forced anymore to ask for exceptions, but instead that new thing becomes part of the standard choices. Right? It becomes a decision where everybody says, oh yeah, that's something that is a standard thing now, just go ahead and do it, it's fine. We have that tool, or we allow that language, or whatever it is that this particular decision process is covering. So that's really an important thing. And the last thing that is important here is really this API program's role is also to provide an API platform. And this platform, the API platform is kind of a nebulous word. And the platform in that case, really it's in its abstract sense. So a platform as the foundation that everybody is building on, that both providers and consumers are building on. So a platform is not really one thing, one product that you buy, or one piece of infrastructure that you put in place. It's the whole set of infrastructure, tools, practices, everything where you help teams or you help consumers to work with. Where if they have a certain API related task, a certain API related problem, so to speak, that the platform will help them to solve that problem. And because the API world is changing so quickly, it's really important to make sure that whatever your platform looks like, make sure it's built to be open and it's built to be changed. Because if there's one thing that's for sure, is your API platform that you have today is different from the API platform that you had a year ago and from the platform that you will have a year from now. There will be things that you maybe get rid of, there will be new things coming along, and that's fine. That's just how the space evolves. And if you design it in the right way, if you have the right approach of managing your platform, you will not really paint yourself in a particular corner and then say, oh no, this, we can't change this anymore, right? This is the only choice that you have, and changing that choice would be super expensive. Always try to make sure that at least there's the potential for alternatives. Maybe for some things you only have one choice, but always try to make sure that you will never depend on this choice being the only choice, and then you're in a much safer space. And to give you one example for this last area, for the API platform, in some companies, not in all, but in some companies, the idea around APIs also is to provide SDKs for APIs, software development kits. So some organizations say APIs are nice, but not everybody can easily consume APIs. So what we want is for people to have SDKs so that they can consume our APIs more easily in their preferred language. If that's a choice that you make as an organization, where you say, we want this as part of building APIs, we also want to provide SDKs. For example, your platform could have tooling in it. There's tools you can buy that basically generate SDKs. You point them at an API, and then they generate SDKs, including documentation even. And that is something that if you need SDKs and you don't want the really laborsome work of creating SDKs to consume a lot of resources, that could be something you invest in. And you say, that's part of our platform. If we have APIs, and let's say these are APIs that are open to partners, open to the outside, then we want to have SDKs, and we have tooling that allows us to generate those SDKs, and we also have this tooling available so that if you make changes to the APIs, creating the new SDK won't really take up any resources because we just regenerate what we had before. So that could be one example of how you provide an API platform. So in summary, what we went through for the last 30 minutes was going through the different areas that should be covered in your API program. So if you have an API program to scale up the API practice in your organization, really try to make sure that it covers all of these areas: strategic alignment, organization and culture, awareness and adoption, observation, and providing an API platform. The specific choices you make in all of these areas are up to you. There's not the one true, the one best API program. And depending on the goals that you have with your APIs, these choices will look different for each organization. But what we've seen is really that if you miss out on any of these areas and you don't really cover it at all, that tends to be not a good sign. So really try to make sure that you look at all these areas, and at least then you have a good coverage of your API program. So in summary, what are the lessons that we've learned today? So we've learned why API programs are an essential ingredient of digital transformation, because you have to make sure that everybody really gets on board with APIs and they have the right support in place, and the API program is what will create that support for them. So we looked at all these areas, and we looked at examples in all of these areas so that you better understand what's an important thing to do in that area and why this area actually matters as part of an API program. And we also had like this list of these areas so that you understand that these are really the important areas that you need to cover in your API program. And if you cover them, at least there's not a huge chunk that you're forgetting, which might bite you back later on. Okay, and with that, we're done. Thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in the slides that I've used in this webinar, you can find them online at the URI you're seeing here. They're web-based and they're linked. So if you look at the slides in your browser, you can actually follow links, and some of the things that I've used in my presentation then are some useful links that you can find in the slides. And if you're generally interested in more information about APIs and the work I'm doing and the kinds of resources that I'm producing, there's more information about myself, my Twitter handle, YouTube videos, LinkedIn, our web presence. And if you have any questions, if you have any feedback, please leave a comment in the comment section. And for more interesting content, definitely sign up here or there. Never quite sure where it is. And with that, once again, thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye.